Through the Gates is produced under the support of the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management to enhance, promote, and defend the North American model of wildlife conservation and responsible wildlife management. That's our mission. We're engaged in fighting at every level so that wildlife management remains science-based and conservation continues to work for our wildlife. To learn more and join the movement, visit SaveTheHuntColorado.com. The North American model of wildlife conservation is the greatest conservation model in the world. It's a success story that should be shared and celebrated because everybody is a part of it. So we got another episode of Through the Gates to Save the Hunt, and I am here with a good friend of mine, Patt Dorsey. And Patt Dorsey right now is with the National Wild Turkey Federation. She also worked for Colorado Parks and Wildlife and retired a couple years ago. But Pat, introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of background of who you are and how we got together, maybe.
Man, I don't know if I remember all that stuff. I think one thing that's important for people to know about me is I grew up in a family that hunting and fishing in the outdoors were really important. My grandparents made it through the Depression because of the deer, ducks, and geese that, were able to be on their table. And so it's always been hugely important. The other half of my family were farmers, so we hunted a lot of times on the family farm. And I always had a deep love of nature, whether it was songbirds or frogs or bats or deer and elk or bunny rabbits. I've always had that. I knew from a very young age, from the time I was, third or fourth grade, that I wanted to be to work in wildlife. And by the time I was in sixth grade, I knew I wanted to work for the Colorado Division of Wildlife. So it took me until I was about 30 years old to do it. I'm obviously a late bloomer and a slow achiever, right?
You weren't in school that long.
No, I wasn't. It just took me that long to get a job. But, that's always what I wanted to do. It's what I'm passionate about. It's beyond just a job, right? It's about who you are, and that's kind of how I feel about me and wildlife.
It's not even a career, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
For a lot of people that I knew that grew up around.
Yeah. I mean, I have a piece of art that hangs on my wall, and it says, hunting is not a matter of life and death. It's much more important than that. And I would lump wildlife in there. At least for me, wildlife's not a matter of life and death. It's way more important than that. Mm-hmm. So. And
how long did you work for the Division of Wildlife in Colorado Parks and Wildlife?
I worked for the CPW for 28 years. So I retired as a regional manager. So I had the whole southwest corner of the state, 4 wildlife administrative areas and 7 state parks.
And so you started out where in the agency?
So I started out as a wildlife officer or district wildlife manager in Boulder.
Really?
Which a lot of people were like, you are a wildlife officer in Boulder? That is an awful...
Now that was a different time then. It was still Boulder, but it's not like Boulder now.
It was awesome. It was totally awesome. We had mountain lions and bears and deer and elk and, mourning doves and everything. And what was really cool, I thought, about Boulder is there were enough different perspectives there that you got into some really lively conversations. And in all honesty, I think if people, no matter what side of their issue they're on, really care about wildlife, I think you can have a conversation around it, right? I would much rather work in a community that they have strong opinions about wildlife, but they're all based in the fact that they like wildlife, they might value them differently than in a community that doesn't care, or with people that don't care.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that that's probably the dividing line on a lot of different things is people have a perception on wildlife and they all care about it in some form or fashion. It's just that more than some care about it in other ways than what other people do. And I think we often put people in a box that they're either here or there, but there's a lot of in between when it comes to wildlife.
Right. And the bottom line is there enough people out there that don't care that we all got to be working together? Or, exactly. We can't let the people that don't care win. That's the way I would put it.
Right. So you were a district wildlife manager. How long were you in that position?
I think I was a district wildlife manager for about 6 years.
Mhm.
And then I went to the Denver office and I ran a couple of education programs, including the statewide hunter ed
Oh, you did? Mhm.
administrator job, which I loved. It was, 450 volunteer instructors that were crazy passionate about teaching people how to be safe in the woods. And then from there, I really missed the field. A lot of people thought I was crazy, but in Boulder, routinely you dealt with I have a prairie dog in my window well, I have a raccoon in my chimney, I have a deer in my garden. I love that kind of stuff. And I was really missing it. So I went back to the field as an area wildlife manager, so a supervisor in Durango.
So you were down there for how long doing that?
I went down there in 2003. So I would say I was an area wildlife manager for 10 years, maybe.
And were you working under Speasy then?
Mm-hmm.
It was all under Tom Speasy?
Yep.
Yeah. And Tom was the regional manager at that time. Now he's working for National Wild Turkey Federation as well.
Yeah, I follow him around like a bad rash or something.
Does he owe you money or what?
Or the other way around.
Yeah, it's like you had to come follow me because you owe me money. So and so you finished as a regional manager. And how long were you in that position?
I was a regional manager for about 6 years.
Yeah, and then Corey Chick took over after you, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So from the time that you started to the time that you finished your career, which you just retired a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, maybe?
About 6 years
Is
ago.
it 6 years ago? Oh,
Yeah.
for crying out loud, really? Yeah. Is that long? Well, I guess COVID turns around and creates a blank spot in everybody's head. So,
exactly.
nobody existed during that time frame. But from the time that you started to the time that you finished, was there a significant change in public perception on wildlife and wildlife management in your eyes? Now, granted, you started on the Front Range and ended up down there. But there's a lot of things that changed from the time that you started to the time that you finished.
Yeah, and I guess maybe when you're internal, you go with the flow, right? And it seems a little more gradual.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's hard for me now is to see what seems to be a real divide. Like, I think we used to be a lot closer, like what you and I were talking about. Like, we could each value wildlife for a different reason,
Right.
but still care about wildlife was the bottom line.
Mhm.
And now it seems a little bit more, I like wildlife, you like wildlife, but you shouldn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We should on each other.
Yeah.
And I always say nobody likes to be should on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
At any level.
at any level, right? Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is I think we need to work together for outcomes, and dividing us doesn't do anything for wildlife, for the people of this state.
There's a lot of perceptions on things that people don't know about, and that could be in the oil and gas industry, or it could be in, the health industry, or what. People have a perception of things. But when it comes to wildlife, there's a set of eyes, and there's a nose and an ear, and something looking back at somebody, and somebody doesn't want something to happen to something, but oftentimes people don't fully understand or comprehend the intricacies, whether it's deer in Durango or bears in Boulder. Hey, that would be a good deal, just D and D and B and B. Or you just look at the way people have perceived things over time, and do you think people have gotten more educated as a whole, or do you think that this divide of education on natural resources is actually becoming more and more prevalent, to where people don't fully comprehend and understand the intricacies of wildlife management?
I don't know if it's gotten any wider. I think there's always been a lot of complexity in wildlife, right? There's why is it turkey vultures roost in that tree, and there's another tree sitting right next to it that looks identical, but they'll never roost in that
Right.
tree, right? So there's a lot of complexities that go on. But maybe what we have changed is maybe we used to be a lot better about being willing to listen to the whole story,
Right.
rather than to take a soundbite, right? Or to form a judgment the second that we have any information at all.
Yeah.
Right. Like we were a little more willing to have the conversation and to listen than we are. But I will tell you one thing that surprised me. Because Durango's a very rural community, and I went in to give a presentation to a group of people that were, trying to remember now, but they were kind of outdoors types. And when we talked about wildlife, the majority of them, when they talked about wildlife, is they were afraid of getting bit by a rattlesnake. They were afraid of getting attacked by a mountain lion. They were afraid. And I was surprised at how much fear there was rather than appreciation. You know what I mean? Or how much they're just looking through it with a different lens than I was. And I don't know, maybe I'm the weird one. I've been the weird one most of my life. But it surprised me that there are people out there that had more fear than respect
We see
for.
that in our wildlife control business. It's like, as I mentioned during this group that we were in for 2 days, there's a skunk in my backyard. You need to come get it. Well, what's he doing? Well, he's just there. Or there's a raccoon on my back porch and you need to come get it. It's because there's this fear that it's going to do something to them, but for some reason they think it shouldn't be where it's at. And it's in town, and it should it be here? And and Karen, and she turns around and answers the phone, and she tries to be as nice as what Karen is, and she gets off, and she's like, oh, for crying out loud! I mean, it's a raccoon that's walking on your front porch. People have that unknown fear about wildlife as a whole, but then you see the ignorance of people that you see on social media. Let's walk up and touch the buffalo. Let's turn around and see if we can feed the bear out of our car. Let's, whatever it might be. So there's a fear, but there's also such an ignorance out of it. And I think that the fear comes from ignorance.
Yeah. And maybe the key really is making a connection, right? Like we used to be a lot more connected, because if you grow a garden, you understand what wildlife management looks like if you want to be able to pick that corn and pick those tomatoes, right?
Right.
And if you've ever raised chickens, you understand what it takes like to get a little 2-day-old chick up to it starts laying eggs on its own. And so maybe it's that connection between people in the land, like what we see is what we see on social media or what we see on the Discovery Channel or some of those, which are great, but that's only a piece of the story.
And people have been taken off of the landscape when it comes to that interaction more than not. I'll give a quick story. A friend of mine, Craig O'Gorman, out of eastern Montana, explained to me that up until about the Depression years of the 1930s, and then into World War II, and then into the Korean War, there was a giant subset of the country that was more rural. It wasn't urban. And I think in 1900, the specifics he gave me, and I use these more often than not, 1900, 90% of the people lived on the landscape and 10% lived in cities. That's a big statement. 1950, it was a 50-50 split. And by 2000, 10% lived on the landscape and 90% lived in the cities. In a 100-year period, and I see this in my deal of 40 years of doing wildlife control work, the people that were a little bit more acceptant and tolerant of things before, because they saw it more frequently. Or they went to grandma's house and they killed a chicken on Sunday and they turn around and raise some chickens and for eggs, and they had their own garden, and maybe they had their own milk cow, or maybe grandma did. Well, then a lot of that's just been taken away, and you go to Whole Foods and you go to Walmart or you go to King Soopers, and that's where you get your stuff. They also look at this mesmerizing thing that when they see deer in town, if they see them frequently, just becomes the norm. But if it's the first time they've seen them, oh my God, there's a deer, there's an elk, there's a bear. And I think that when you get into the wildlife side of it, it's probably even more extreme because people don't fully comprehend how that moved into town or how they've moved into their space and how they can turn around and coexist. We talk about coexistence all the time. What is coexistence and how do people interpret that? And as I mentioned, everybody's got a level of tolerance. From your perspective, and you living in Durango, but then working in an agency that covers the entire state, 960 species of wildlife at the time, now 961 plus a bunch of invertebrates. Was there 7,000 invertebrates that they put on the list? Have people's perceptions changed about how to manage wildlife and how to be stewards of wildlife, how to care about wildlife?
I don't know how to answer that. Or are there just a lot more perspectives being brought to the table, right? And I think, one of the things I think about too, when you mentioned, now there's deer in town. If you see deer all the time, it's not a big surprise to you. But the other thing that comes with that sometimes is I think we see deer in town, so we assume the deer population is okay.
Yeah.
And that's not true either on a statewide perspective. The reason they could be in town, and let's look at black bears as a good example.
Mm-hmm. Which you know a little bit about.
And this year has been so dry, and the natural food crops are just not doing very well. And so these bears are in town. And is that because we have too many bears, or is that because, in all honesty, right, the habitat is so limiting and so much better in town where people are irrigating their yards and they're growing apple trees and they're doing all that stuff. And so I think, again, it gets down to being really complex.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had a simple answer or silver bullet or, whatever.
Did you, when you were employed by the agency, did you find more often than not that the agency was easy or maybe more easily blamed for things that people didn't fully understand, whether they were agriculture producers, whether they're wildlife proponents and advocates, whether they were sportsmen and women, whether they just lived in town? It was easy to point the finger at somebody that turned around and had a sheep on their shoulder and drove around with a emblem on the truck.
It always is, right? Like, what I really want is to blame all my problems on somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time in particular, because I thought it was amazing, I got a phone call one morning from a guy that said, my neighbor has got so many deer in their yard, and they're driving me nuts, and the deer are coming over and they're eating my plants and they're doing all that stuff. And my neighbor is feeding deer. And the neighbor who was feeding deer called me and said, my next door neighbor is like shooting, throwing rocks at my deer, and right. And so it was interesting. And both of them were like, you need to fix it. Mm-hmm. And I thought, the best thing I could do is, bring a couple of, Coca-Colas over, and we all sit out on the porch and talk about this, right? And think about, we probably shouldn't be feeding deer, and
we should be throwing rocks.
We probably should learn to get along with them a little bit.
Yeah.
You live in a place where they have deer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel sorry for the agency, because everybody's looking for somebody to blame, and like I said, it'd be super nice to have somebody, right, that you could blame all your problems on. Mm-hmm. It's not my fault my clothes are dirty. It's not my fault that,
Yeah, my grass grew, and it's not my fault that it grew, so I didn't turn around and end up mowing it. I think too, as much as you and I work together on different things, the cross-pollination of perspectives is increasingly valuable, but it becomes more complex. It's not a simple conversation because everybody's got a different perspective, and they have different values and morals and ethics and beliefs and understandings and the level of education. Trying to deal with groups that are set in their ways, that want to alter or change what other individuals do, whether it's a homeowners association or whether it's an agriculture producing association or it's just people that want to go hike on the forest and they don't like the way that things are being managed or whatever. Everybody's got a different perception. How does the agency, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, interact at so many different levels and actually come out as the expert on so many different things, given the landscape that we've got to deal with and the different perceptions of 6 million people and 84 million visitors? I mean, its opinions are like, what, and everybody's got one, but most people have more than one. How does the agency deal with those complexities and continually grow and through the sausage making process?
And my opinion may be different than other people's, but I think they do a really good job of trying to navigate that. And the reason I say that is they are the wildlife experts, right? They've got some of the best trained people that work for them that any agency could want. And not only that, but there are people that are willing to spend all night, all day, all weekend working if they're needed. And so they're really dedicated, really smart, really talented, dedicated to the service of the people of Colorado too. I think that's one thing people forget. And so sometimes it's hard for me to sit and watch because I think to a certain extent, we need to extend a little grace to CPW as they try to navigate all these different groups, right? We're putting a lot of demands on them. And the bottom line is, I think, we need to give them some grace and trust. No one can do a really fantastic job if they're being second guessed all the time, because then they're spending time trying to convince you that they know what they're doing rather than doing what they should be doing.
Exactly. Do you think that the agriculture community has become more engaged and more educated through the entire process since Proposition 114 on the wolf introduction?
I can't really speak to that because I left the agency before Proposition 114 passed. But what I will say is I think the agriculture community for a long time in recent history has been really good about trying to work with the agency in a way that, like obviously you own a ranch or you own a farm and you need to continue making a living and you want to stay on the land. But I think the bottom line is they've been willing to listen and they've been willing to work with the agency. That's just my perspective. Like I said, that's pre, Proposition 114. But I would expect in meetings that I've been in and stuff, I think especially individual landowners are a lot more willing to have a good conversation and look for solutions. Now you get thrown in a room full of, 100 landowners or 100, hunters, right? Like you're going to get tomatoes thrown at you and stuff. But when you have one-on-one conversations, I think people get it.
And when you have such a diversified group like what we just went through in the last 2 days here in Frisco, when you have that diversification, it allows you to maybe step back, synthesize what somebody else said, because then somebody else adds to it. And it's not like 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 people ganging up on one person. You got many different sectors coming together to give the perspectives of the landscape. And I think that CPW has done a very, very good job to be able to do that, given the complexities of a lot of different discussions. You saw Proposition 127 come to fruition last year, and you saw it voted down. Based upon what you saw from inside of the agency and then Prop 114 with the wolves, do you think Coloradans had an epiphany about the difference in wildlife management from 114 to 127 and 2020 to 2024? Or do you think that they actually just started to educate themselves better?
I think one of the things about the Wildlife Commission process or the way things are done outside of the ballot box, and I'm going to use the commission as an example, but at the commission level or you go to a CPW stakeholders meeting, what the agency has an opportunity to do is hear from different perspectives, right? And you as a person, if you attend that meeting, you hear all those different perspectives. And when we go to the ballot box, we're usually taking away a tool that may not need to be used all the time, but it could be used some of the time. And we don't know what the future looks like either, right?
Right.
I'm a big fan of having, maybe I'm a hoarder of tools, but I like to have as many tools in my toolbox as possible.
I've got tools that are in packages that haven't been opened yet because in case I might need it someday.
Exactly. That's a good example.
Or my son says, you don't know how to use it. That's why you got it in the package. So,
but when you read your blue book and you see what's on the ballot, you don't know what that looks like through the perspectives of a rancher in northwestern Colorado, and you don't know what that looks like from, somebody that lives on the Eastern Plains.
Or the manager that has to deal with that, and then the entire level of society. I mean, the voters and the residents of the state of Colorado. The person that sits here and votes on something 250 miles away from a management or an interaction perspective, it's hard for them to do that in an educated manner unless it's just based on an opinion.
Yeah. And look, you're seeing it through your lens based on what you're reading, right? And I don't even know how many people read the Blue Book. I read it from cover to cover, but I'm kind of nerdy that way. But yeah, if you're only basing it on television commercials or, what your neighbor tells you, or what the mood strikes at the time, but let's assume everybody reads the Blue Book, you're still only getting two perspectives, right? The pros and the cons, not these different lenses.
Exactly.
And one of the things I'll say about Colorado is, we go from desert to 14,000 foot peaks.
I said that many times.
And we've got people that live on the eastern plains.
At 3,000 foot.
That dryland wheat farm. Mm-hmm. And we've got people that are billionaires that own tech companies, right? And everything in between. And we've always been really good about listening to each other and doing what's right for the whole state, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, the day that we don't do that is the day that, it'll just be a sad day for Colorado.
Right. If you want to support a company that supported the efforts to defeat Proposition 127, then you need to support Davis Tent. Davis Tent has provided quality canvas goods for outdoorsmen for the last 50 plus years. For more information, go to davistent.com. If you want to support another business that was instrumental in helping us defeat Proposition 127, check out Salida Gun Shop. Salida Gun Shop in Salida, Colorado provides quality products, expertise, and knowledge from individuals that actually do what they sell. Go to salidagunshop.com. Listen to the advice of Cameron Haynes and support companies that are supporting your cause and your efforts. Minturn Anglers is one of those companies. Minturn Anglers provides product and fishing excursions in Colorado and are second to none. For more information, go to minturnanglers.com. Tell me just a little bit, and I'd love to have you back on for a longer period of time. This is kind of an impromptu get-together just because we were in the same place at the same time. But to get you on for a longer period of time to discuss some specific projects and favorites that you actually dealt with in your career that's newsworthy today. I mean, just because of how things transitioned to where we manage specific species of wildlife, or maybe it was introduction, or maybe it was, a combination of different management tools. Tell me a little bit about Patt Dorsey just for a little bit. You like to hunt, but you're a big time photographer. You really like watching wildlife and photographing wildlife. Do you think that the photography side is as important as the hunting side monetarily when it comes into the management and the ability for an agency to manage? And I know what I think, because there's not like a license to go out and photograph stuff. Do you think that it's as important, and is there a mechanism that eventually down the road could be discussed or created that those people could turn around and kick money into the pot besides like a habitat stamp or something?
I think with respect to money going directly to the agency, directly for wildlife management, the hunting and the fishing side provide the revenue. The wildlife photographers, the wildlife viewers, the rest of us, right? We all contribute to maybe a local economy, but very little of that funding is going back directly to the agency, if any, I should probably say, right? Mm-hmm. Unless you happen to buy a lottery ticket and you buy a lot of them, or, you buy a habitat stamp, right? There are other ways to contribute, maybe through the checkoff program on your state income tax forms or whatever. But most people probably don't realize it, but the agency doesn't get a state tax money. Mm-hmm. Right? It all comes from user fees. And right now there's not a good system to get user fee monies from other people that enjoy wildlife.
Or even if they enjoy knowing wildlife's there, if they don't necessarily interact with it, a lot of their activities could be contrary to what is being done on the landscape for that wildlife, whether it's camping or maybe it's off-road vehicles or whatever it might be. It's not throwing anybody out with the bathwater. It's just what they do doesn't necessarily contribute to the benefit of them knowing that it's there and they get a chance to turn around and enjoy it, however they want to.
Right. And I think, the other terminology I'm going to throw out here, and maybe this is a topic for a different discussion, but we used to call it consumptive and non-consumptive, right? And
just like we heard today about advocates and supposedly the rest of us are non-advocates, which is a misnomer. We're all advocates.
And we're all consumptive.
Exactly.
And so it's like, how do we all pay back into that system, right? Because like I said, I've hunted since I was like 9 years old, and I don't mind that my hunting and fishing license fees go to pay for bats and songbirds. I'm glad they do. I love them. Yeah. Lizards, I love them. And it's like, how can we get that mindset going the other direction? But like I said, I don't even think a lot of people realize that they're not paying in right now.
So do you have any tags that you're looking forward to utilizing this year?
I do.
What did you get?
I have a deer tag that starts September 2nd right in my backyard.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you're supposed to be like scouting or something.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. The thing I will say about the hunting piece of it is the one, not the one thing, but the thing that makes hunting so powerful to me, no matter where you have your license, but I like it in my backyard because honestly.
But preface that's not in your backyard.
No, it's not in my backyard.
It's not like a little picket fence and you're sitting there next to the hammock.
San Juan Mountains.
Okay.
The San Juan Mountains. But what I like about it is, I have a spot that I go to, and I get up to the same rock, and that's where I sit for a while. And on the way to that same rock, I'm checking out, are the acorns ready? Well, is there any bear tracks? What kind of songbirds are around? How dry is it? It's just this intimate connection with my backyard, the entire San Juan Mountains. But it's that intimate connection with the landscape that I think, maybe a lot of people, and I'm making an assumption, are not feeling at that same level. And I say, I don't want to climb every mountain, but I want to climb the same mountain every year on the same day and be sitting in that same meadow under that same tree every September 2nd,
And it's hard for people that don't do what we do to fully comprehend, to understand, because you're in pursuit of something. There's people that could do something similar just by going out and recreating outside, that they don't have a weapon and they don't have a tag in their pocket, that they have a hard time comprehending, well, why would you want to do that when you could do it just like me? And there's a difference there, and it's an education, but it's also a different upbringing, a different philosophy. And I think that getting them to understand why we do this, and I know this from me being on the Wildlife Council for 8 years, that people don't need to do what we do. They just need to understand that why we do it, that they benefit off of it. It's a benefit of hunting and fishing that they get without having to contribute. We'd like them to contribute monetarily to help the agency and manage all the species that they have to deal with. But there's an intimate component of a little bit of self-sufficiency and a conquering challenges or whatever it might be. And we all can enjoy that in a different level. And I don't know if you recall or not, but when Shane Mahoney was at the Capitol back in 2022 at Sportsman's Day at the Capitol, and he did that. And we've often used some of his clips for our social stuff. And he talked about even the people that don't hunt, the first thing they do when they come back from a trip after seeing wildlife, more often than not, is they tell people about, I saw a bear and I saw a bighorn sheep. They didn't, but so there's this centric component of the value of the landscape. It's just that we enjoy it differently than them, even though we're not always successful. Oftentimes we take
I was going to say, I'm a non-consumptive hunter.
If you walk around and take your bow for a walk or your rifle for a walk, they take their backpack for a walk or they take their camera for a walk. And I think that showing that difference in Colorado's wildlife resources is it can be utilized and it can be abused, and it can also be there just knowing that it's there, that we turn around and utilize it and however we see fit under the legal guidelines and regulations that are established under the North American model.
And the one thing I'll add to that conversation is I used to think that people that photographed wildlife couldn't enjoy wildlife the same way I did. Like, you know, in all honesty, like, I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and went out in the dark and froze myself to death. And I was doing that because I had a hunting license. But since I've really been getting into photography, I also understand that a lot of photographers, a lot of wildlife viewers probably get that same feeling that I do. And it makes me wonder, you know, what can hunters do better, right? To join together with other wildlife viewers. It shouldn't be us against them.
No.
Because I think to your point, Dan, everything's the same except for a few minor things, right? Everything else is about it is just a different way of viewing, you know, our experience or our motivation maybe for getting out there may be slightly different, but we all take away the same things.
Yeah, and wildlife photographers are the quintessential trophy hunters in my mind because their pictures are everywhere. But as soon as you put a person in that picture, you become the bastard on the landscape because you harvested that. But people need to understand that the harvest is the smallest part of the entire equation of being a sportsman or woman. And at the same time, that only happens a certain percentage of the time. It's not like it goes out, just like a photographer, you're a photographer and a sportswoman. How many times do you go out just to take pictures and always get the right shot? You might take a bunch of pictures, but you never always get the right shot. You could turn around, and I know because I used to do a lot of photography as a kid. You snap, 300 pictures, and maybe one would come out to you go, okay, that's magazine quality. That's something you could do because the other ones are a little blurred, or the movement or wasn't full frame or whatever. It wasn't the direction you wanted it. The light wasn't right. I look at photographers as the quintessential trophy hunter because they're probably as less successful as what most sportsmen and women are. It's just that our challenges and our endeavors are trying to take something home with us. And we get criticized and bastardized for that, not all the time, but by certain segments of the population.
And I don't think what people totally get either is, at least from a food perspective, I process my own meat. I've wrap it, cut it, the whole thing all by myself. And that meat to me is the best meat on the planet, right? It came out of mountain snow that melted and turned into plants and the whole deal. So it's the highest quality meat that I can put in my freezer. And every time I have a package of elk burger or a deer steak, I'm reliving that experience, right? And
you don't get that when you go to the grocery store and you cook that steak and you remember. I remember seeing Bob on the meat aisle.
I remember him when he was a little cat.
I know Joe, who runs the produce section.
This reminds me of Joe, my son.
So let's start to wrap things up because I know you got to get on the road. Give us a brief rundown of what your capacity is in the National Wild Turkey Federation. What do you do?
So I'm currently the Director of Conservation Operations for the West region. So we have all of the Rocky Mountain states west to the Pacific coast. I supervise 3 biologists, an initiative coordinator, and some term staff. And I'd want to give a little shout out to the Turkey Federation, because one of the reasons I joined the Turkey Federation is because of a couple of things. One is, turkeys are forest birds. They need big trees. They need a healthy understory. And when you watch what's happening in the West with wildfires and forests that are overstocked and that kind of thing, I think we need to pay more attention to our forests and forest health. And then I forgot what the other thing I was going to say was. The other thing I like about it, honestly, is we're a true federation. So our local chapters and our state chapters have a lot of say in what we do and how we spend our money and all of that kind of stuff, which I think.
So not everything goes to the mothership and then maybe trickles down.
Right.
Okay.
And so it, and for individual organizations, it might be that they just, they're really interested in helping 4-H kids get started in shooting sports, or it could be something else, but or it could be a habitat project. But I like that autonomy a little bit and everybody feeling like they own a piece of the mission.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And it shows in the resilience and the empowering effect that I think why people gravitate to you and the way that you bring things to the table. You're one of the most thoughtfully minded, educated women that I've ever been around when it comes to wildlife and wildlife management. But I know you're highly respected on a bunch of different levels and a bunch of different circles. I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Patt Dorsey.
You haven't talked to the right people then.
Well, but I bet there's a lot more that'll say something bad about Dan Gates than there is about Patt Dorsey. But I'd like to continue this conversation at some point in time. Sit down, maybe bring a photo album, or maybe bring some accomplishments or some examples. I know, like I say, I know I caught you off guard to say, hey, will you have a conversation before you get on the road for 5 hours? But looking forward and figuring out where Colorado is, and let's just say hypothetically in 2 to 5 years, what would you like to see Colorado building to, given the fact that you've got 28 years experience in the agency, 5 or 6 years experience in the Federation? What do we need to do to keep the momentum going to where we don't get divided and specific subjects don't turn around and counteract or are counterintuitive to what the overall goal is?
I don't know if it's something we need to do or something we need to maintain. And that is, I'm going to go back to the fact that CPW has really good biologists, really good wildlife officers, really good leadership. The bottom line is we need to trust them and give them a little bit of grace. And if we can, the ideal thing would be to find a way that we can talk about some of the complexities and quit trying to put simple solutions on top of complex problems, right? It's like you ask a complex problem or you ask a complex question and somebody says, yes, that doesn't work, right? It's like, what would you like for dinner? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Or in my wife's case, I don't care. And I'm like, well, how about this? No, I don't want that. Well, then you do care. Of course, we've been married 38 years, and 2 years before that we were together. So that's a standing joke. I don't even know why I ask anymore. So it's like, just pull in. Well, I don't want this. Okay, we'll go to the next spot. So
what I really mean is I want to talk about this for a while.
Yeah, exactly. I just drive around and look and see. If we move the direction that we're moving now, well, let me go backwards. I'm going to ask you one question. In your mind, given the current landscape of what we have to deal with, what's the biggest hurdle coming to Colorado wildlife management that we've had to deal with and that you would like to not have to continue to deal with? Because I know what my answer is.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of that one. That's a great question. I think it's, how do I say it? I think maybe if people understood the connection that they have to wildlife and what the consequences, whether they're intended or not, on those wildlife populations were, I think we'd be headed in a better direction, right? So that means whenever you take away tools from an agency or, I don't know what a good example is. You plan for something, you plan for a development without including what wildlife mitigation might look like or what wildlife compensation would look like. The bottom line is, we're not moving forward and not moving in the right direction. So,
do you think that, and I'm not trying to guide you in a specific direction, do you think that we could do a better job of managing wildlife if we didn't have to worry about the politics of how that's played into wildlife management, not just here in Colorado, but throughout the West?
I would say I think politics have always been a part of wildlife management. The key is how do we balance all the things, right? Like the way I've heard it put, there's the three legs of the wildlife management stool. You know, there's what's biologically possible, there's what's socially acceptable, and then there's this piece that's like what's economically feasible and politically acceptable. And all of those need to play together. But what we can't have is, you know, the biology completely outweighing the social concerns, or the politics completely outweighing the biology, right? It's all got a balance. If you had a three-legged stool and one leg was 6 inches tall and the other leg was 24 inches tall and the third leg was 12 inches tall,
that'd be really comfortable.
It's going to be a really uncomfortable stool, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the key is, how do we be thoughtful about what's good for all the people and keep all three legs of the stool balanced?
That's a pretty damn good answer, Pat. You could tell you're a regional manager.
I don't know about that. I'm sweating, Dan.
No, let's do this again. And once we get our studio built, and if you're back in Denver, we can still use Bobby Marshall's studio up in Evergreen. But if you're willing and able, I mean, we're going to see each other occasionally. We see each other fairly often as it is. But I'd like to sit down with you for 2 hours or so, and maybe even have another guest in there that if you want to include somebody else, because these are the kind of conversations that we've gotten into with the podcast, with Through the Gates, that are centric to Colorado, but other states are paying attention to what we're doing, message-wise and creation-wise. And I think that every state has their own systems that they have to work through, but the underlying element of wildlife management is that there's a difference of opinion straight across the board with non-consumptive users and consumptive users, or advocates and sportsmen and women, which we are all of that. And I just appreciate you sitting down and having the conversation and getting together and get you on the road and let you finish up and do your weekend. But I think that moving forward, we can continue to figure out a way to bridge the gap and create some sort of middle of the road stuff on so many different things. That's why I've been playing as long as what I have, and trying to get a point across, but trying to make sure that something isn't taken away just for the sake of taking it away, no matter what it is. And I think that, like you say, your individual career has brought you to a level to where now you're engaging more on the advocacy side as opposed to the management side. And I just appreciate you doing what you've done over time and the friendship that we built.
Yeah. And you know what I'll say too is, whenever we start measuring things in wins and losses, the wildlife loses.
Yeah.
Right? And so we got to figure out a way that we work out win-wins.
Good closing statement. Patt Dorsey, National Wild Turkey Federation, former Colorado Parks and Wildlife regional manager, and a good friend to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Through the Gates. For more content like this, make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe on all of our channels.